In court, my parents said, "Our daughter can't pay her own bills. She's always been a useless dreamer." The judge interrupted, staring at them. "She's been a senior surgeon for almost 10 years. The entire room went quiet as their faces crumbled. My name's Emily, and I'm 34 now, but to make sense of what unfolded in that courtroom, I've got to rewind to when I was 17 and told my parents, Linda and Frank Dawson, that I wanted to be a doctor. You'd figure most parents would beam with pride, right? Well, mine didn't. A doctor? My mom let out this sharp, mocking laugh. Not the warm kind, but the cutting sound I'd gotten used to over the years. "Emily, sweetheart, you can barely keep your room in order. Do you really think you can handle saving lives?" My dad piped up from behind his newspaper without even glancing at me. "She's always had her head in the clouds, Linda. Remember when she swore she'd be an astronaut at 8? Then a marine biologist at 12? This is just another passing phase." But to me it wasn't a phase. Since I was 15, I'd been volunteering at the local hospital, shadowing nurses and doctors whenever I got the chance. I'd watch them change lives, ease pain, and bring comfort to families at their lowest points. That was the world I wanted to be part of more than anything. "Medicine is way too competitive," my mom continued, her voice dripping with that patronizing tone I'd come to despise. "You need flawless grades, flawless scores, flawless everything. You're a B student at best, Emily. Be realistic." My dad finally lowered the paper and backed her up. "Your mother's right. Why not aim for something more achievable? Teaching, maybe? Nursing? Those are respectable careers for someone with your limits." Limits. That word burned deeper than they'll ever understand. We weren't poor, but we weren't wealthy either. Dad was a mid-level manager at an insurance firm, and Mom did part-time bookkeeping. They lived comfortably but obsessed over keeping up appearances with friends and neighbors. Having a daughter who was just average didn't fit the polished image they wanted to project. My older brother Mark was their shining star. He'd been valedictorian, debate team captain, and earned a full scholarship to a top business school. He embodied everything they wanted in a child, while I felt like the disappointing afterthought. When I insisted I was serious about medical school, they refused to help with college research or applications. "We're not wasting money on impossible dreams," Mom declared. "Mark needs our support for his MBA. At least his plans make sense." So I tackled it on my own. I spent endless afternoons in the school library, digging into pre-med programs, scholarships, and loan options. Through grit and long nights buried in textbooks, I pulled my GPA from a 3.2 up to a 3.8 by senior year. I took the SAT 3 times until I earned a score I could be proud of. When the acceptance letter from State University's pre-med program arrived, along with a partial scholarship, I was overjoyed. I ran into the living room where my parents were glued to the evening news. "I got in!" I shouted, waving the letter like a trophy. State accepted me for pre-med, and I even got a scholarship. Mom barely looked away from the TV. "That's nice, dear. Don't forget to take out the trash." Dad gave me a bit more attention, though still dismissive. "State University? Emily, that's hardly Harvard. And pre-med doesn't guarantee you'll become a doctor. Most kids don't make it past the first couple of years." "But I got a scholarship," I pushed, desperate for recognition. "Partial scholarship," Mom corrected sharply. "Which means you'll still need loans. Plenty of them. And when you switch majors or drop out, you'll be buried in debt with nothing to show." That night I overheard them talking in their bedroom. "She's going to humiliate us," Mom muttered. "When she fails out, everyone will know. The Johnsons' daughter is on her way to becoming a lawyer. The Petersons' boy is heading into finance, and what do we have? A daughter who thinks being a doctor is as simple as volunteering at a hospital." That's what my mom sneered one night. Dad's response was just as dismissive. "Let her give it a shot. Maybe failing will finally knock some sense into her." I left for college that fall carrying a single suitcase, a modest savings account from waiting tables at a diner, and a heart weighed down by their doubts. Determination, sharpened by spite, kept me moving forward. College turned out to be tougher than I ever pictured, but I was ready. While classmates went to parties, I buried myself in books. When they slept in, I was already tucked away in the library by 6 in the morning. To cover expenses that my scholarship didn't, I juggled work-study jobs, serving food in the cafeteria during the day and scrubbing office floors at night. My parents hardly ever called, and when they did, the questions were always the same. How are your grades? Mom would ask. I've got a 3.9 GPA. I'd answer with pride. Don't get overconfident. Pre-med only gets harder. Maybe think about switching to something easier. Communications, perhaps? When I came home for holidays, they'd introduce me with a shrug. This is Emily, our daughter who's still figuring out what she wants to do. Never once did they say pre-med. Never once did I hear pride in their voices. My brother Mark, on the other hand, had finished his MBA and landed a position at a big consulting firm in Chicago. He was pulling in a great salary, owned a condo downtown, and every conversation with my parents revolved around him. His promotions, his new car, his polished girlfriend. Mark just got another raise, Mom would gush. He's so smart with money. Not like certain people piling on student loans for impossible dreams. Those digs continued through all 4 years of undergrad, even as I held on to my GPA, nailed the MCAT, and earned a spot at the same university's medical school. By then I didn't expect cheers from them, so their reaction barely surprised me. Medical school? Dad shook his head. Emily, that debt will crush you. And even if you somehow graduate, and that's a stretch, you won't earn decent money until your 30s. Mark's already thriving. This is what I want, I told them quietly. What you want and what's realistic are two separate things, Mom shot back. But you're an adult now. Make your own mistakes. Medical school was brutal, there's no sugarcoating it. I cried from sheer exhaustion, felt buried under mountains of information, and heard their critical voices echo in my head more times than I can count. But unlike many of my classmates, I had years of practice proving people wrong. Every cruel remark, every dismissal, every prediction of failure became fuel I burned to keep going. I thrived in clinical rotations, especially surgery. Something about the precision, the instant results, the life or death stakes lit a fire in me. My mentors took notice and urged me toward surgical specialties. In my 3rd year, when I called home to share the exciting news that I'd been picked for a competitive surgical rotation at the teaching hospital, Mom barely listened. I could hear the television in the background as she muttered, "That's nice, dear. Oh, did you hear? Mark just closed a huge deal. They're sending him to London for a month." After that, I stopped calling as often. When medical school wrapped up, I matched into a general surgery residency at Metropolitan General, one of the most respected programs in the state. Residency meant 5 years of 80-hour weeks, non-stop learning, and taking on more responsibility step by step. It was the hardest, most exhausting stretch of my life, and exactly what I dreamed of. My parents showed up to my graduation, but instead of celebrating me, they seemed more focused on mingling with other families, as though their presence was just another chance to polish their image. At the reception, I caught my mom talking to another parent. "Yes, Emily finally wrapped up her degree," she said, her tone half dismissive. "Though she's not actually a doctor yet. She still has residency, which is basically just more school. Our son Mark, though, he's already pulling in 6 figures with business consulting." That old sting hit me again, but I shoved it aside. I had bigger things to focus on, lives to save, skills to master, and a career to build. During residency, I met David, another surgical resident who understood the grind of our path. We bonded over late-night cases, greasy Chinese takeout between shifts, and the shared knowledge that our profession demanded everything from us. At first, I resisted getting involved. I was so consumed with proving myself that I barely had room for anything else. But David was persistent, asking me out 3 different times before I finally gave in to coffee during a break. That quick coffee stretched into 4 hours of conversation, covering everything from surgical techniques to our guilty pleasure of laughing at ridiculous medical dramas that got every detail wrong. At one point he told me, "I've never met someone as passionate about surgery as I am. It's refreshing." I laughed. "Most people just think I'm obsessed. Most people don't get what it really takes to save lives," he replied with quiet certainty. David came from a family of teachers who'd always supported him, even though they worried about the toll of long hours and stress. When I met them in our 2nd year of residency, they welcomed me with warmth and genuine curiosity about my specialization and goals. The contrast to my own family couldn't have been sharper. When I introduced David to my parents, Dinner turned into a showcase of Mark's latest achievements. They barely acknowledged me, instead asking David if he'd thought about pursuing a safer specialty. "Surgery's so unpredictable," my mom said over dessert. "All those emergencies, all that stress. Have you thought about internal medicine? The hours are steadier." David handled it politely, but later in the car he didn't hold back. "Emily, your parents act like they have no clue what you've done. They talk about you as if you're still some uncertain kid." I sighed. They've always seen me that way. To them, I'm chasing something impossible. His brow furrowed. "Impossible? You're one of the best residents here. Dr. Martinez trusted you to assist on that liver resection last week. Nobody hands that kind of responsibility to someone chasing pipe dreams." We married in my final year of residency, a small, simple ceremony held in the hospital chapel. My parents came, but they looked at it as just another of my impractical choices. "Two doctors getting married," Mom muttered to my aunt at the reception. "They'll never see each other. It's just not practical." What she didn't understand was that we saw each other constantly, in the break room at 3 in the morning, and in the fleeting moments between crises when we'd steal a kiss in some quiet hallway. Our marriage worked precisely because we both knew what this life demanded. After the wedding, I poured myself even deeper into my work, determined to earn the strongest position possible as an attending. That meant more than just being a skilled surgeon. It required research, teaching, and involvement in hospital systems. I launched a quality improvement project targeting postoperative infections in emergency surgeries. It meant analyzing hundreds of cases, revising protocols, and training staff on new procedures. It was grueling, detailed work piled on top of my surgical load, but the outcome was worth it. Within 6 months, our infection rate dropped by 23%. Dr. Richardson, our chief of surgery, took notice of my project. "Williams," he said after I presented my results at the monthly department meeting, "this is exactly the kind of initiative that separates good surgeons from great ones. Have you thought about a fellowship?" A fellowship meant another year of specialized training, but it also opened doors to more advanced procedures and leadership positions. I decided to go after a fellowship in minimally invasive surgery, a field growing rapidly that would let me perform complex operations through smaller incisions, cutting down recovery times and complications for patients. The application process was fierce: recommendation letters, published research, interviews at top programs across the country. When I told my parents about it, their response was no surprise. "More school." Dad groaned. "Emily, when are you going to start actually working and making money?" "I am working," I reminded him. "Residents are paid. Fellows are paid too. This is the path." Mom chimed in. "Mark's been earning a real salary for years now. He's buying property, saving for retirement. You're still acting like a student." I tried to explain how medical training takes longer but leads to greater opportunities in the long run, but they didn't want to hear it. To them, Mark's quick success straight out of business school looked more impressive than my steady climb through one of the hardest professions there is. I was accepted into the fellowship at Metropolitan General, which meant I could keep training alongside the same team that had guided me through residency. During that year, I honed my skills in emergency procedures, cases where patients came in hanging between life and death, and the surgeon's hands were the only thing keeping them alive. The intensity was exhausting, but I thrived in it. There's no way to describe the feeling when you realize your judgment and technique are all that stand between someone and tragedy. One case from that year has stayed with me. A 28-year-old construction worker named Miguel came in after a job site accident left him with severe internal bleeding. He was unconscious, his blood pressure crashing, and the ER team couldn't stabilize him. I was called in for an emergency exploratory surgery. The OR was a whirlwind. Nurses prepping tools, anesthesia monitoring vitals, me racing to locate the bleeding before time ran out. After 3 tense hours, I repaired a torn spleen and stopped the hemorrhage. Miguel pulled through and was back at work within 6 weeks. His wife, Maria, had waited in the hospital chapel with their 2 little kids, praying the whole time. When I finally came out and told her he'd be okay, she collapsed into sobs and hugged me so hard I thought my ribs might snap. "You saved him," she repeated over and over. "You saved my husband." That kind of moment, the raw proof that all the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the relentless push had truly saved a life, made every doubt vanish. It's a feeling that can't be explained to anyone who hasn't lived it, but it's why I never wavered in my choice, even when my own family dismissed it. That fellowship year also pulled me deeper into teaching. I was invited to lecture medical students on surgical methods and mentor junior residents as they stepped into their first rotations. Teaching forced me to explain not just how I worked but why I made certain choices, and in doing so, I sharpened my own skills. Toward the end of the fellowship, Dr. Martinez, one of my earliest and most trusted mentors, pulled me aside. "Emily, you've got something rare," he said. "You're not only technically excellent, you understand the human side of medicine. That blend of skill and empathy is rare." And Dr. Martinez was right. I'd watched surgeons with brilliant hands but cold hearts, and others with endless compassion but not enough technical precision to back it up. Striking the balance between excellence in the OR and genuine human connection had become my greatest strength. As my fellowship drew to a close, I received job offers from hospitals across the country. Metropolitan General wanted me as an attending, but I also had tempting opportunities in Boston, Denver, and San Francisco. The choice wasn't about chasing the biggest paycheck or most prestigious name. It was about where I could build the kind of career I envisioned. I chose to stay at Metropolitan General. Not only was I already part of a team I trusted and understood, but they also offered me the chance to develop their emergency surgery program. I'd get to shape it from the ground up, set protocols, train staff, and create a program that could stand as a model for others. At 29, I officially became Dr. Emily Williams, board-certified general surgeon. David and I bought a modest home in a quiet suburb about an hour from the hospital. It wasn't extravagant, but it was ours, a symbol of everything we'd fought for and finally achieved. We were no longer students or trainees. We were professionals with stable footing and promising futures. Not long after, I was stunned to learn I'd been named Surgeon of the Year by the State Medical Association. The award came with a $10,000 prize and would be presented at a formal gala, attended by hundreds of medical leaders. It was the kind of honor most physicians only dream about. Overjoyed, I called my parents, hoping maybe this was the moment they'd finally acknowledge what I'd built. "Mom, I've got amazing news," I said. "I've been named Surgeon of the Year." There was a pause. "That's nice, Emily. What does that even mean?" "It means I'm being recognized as one of the top surgeons in the state. There'll be a ceremony, and I'll receive an award for my contributions." "Oh, well, congratulations, I suppose. Does it come with money?" "Yes, there's a prize, but that's not really the point. It's professional recognition." Well, Mark just learned he's being considered for partner at his firm. Now that's a real achievement: financial stability, prestige, a future. I hung up the phone that day more disappointed than I had been in years. Not because I craved their approval anymore, but because I finally accepted that no matter what I accomplished, they would never see me as successful. Later that evening, David found me crying in the kitchen. When I told him what happened, he was furious. "Emily, you save lives every single day. Your peers recognize you as one of the best in the state. You make more money than most people ever will. You've surpassed every goal you set. Their blindness to that doesn't reflect on you. It reflects on them." He was right, though it still hurt. The award ceremony itself was breathtaking. I wore a navy gown that made me feel both strong and polished, and when my name was called, I walked to the podium with pride in the long road that had brought me there. The standing ovation from my colleagues was worth more than any recognition my parents could have offered. In my acceptance speech, I spoke about perseverance and the power of believing in yourself, even when others don't. I didn't mention my parents outright, but anyone who knew my story understood the undertone. Sometimes, I told the audience, the people who doubt us most are the ones who end up fueling us the hardest. Every obstacle can become a stepping stone if you're determined to keep climbing. After the applause settled and the evening wound down, Dr. Richardson, Metropolitan General's chief of surgery, approached me with an offer I hadn't seen coming. "Emily," Dr. Richardson told me one evening after a departmental meeting, "I've been following your progress closely and I'm impressed, not only by your technical skills in the OR but also by the leadership you've shown. We're opening a new satellite hospital next year, and I'd like you to think about applying for the chief of surgery position." Chief of surgery? At 34, I'd be among the youngest department heads in the entire system. The role meant overseeing dozens of staff members, managing a multi-million-dollar budget, and setting the surgical standards for an entire facility. I tried to keep my voice steady though my heart was pounding. "I'm honored you'd even consider me," I said. He nodded. "Think about it. The role comes with a significant raise and the chance to build a department from the ground up. I believe you'd be perfect." The raise he hinted at would bring my annual salary close to $500,000, not counting bonuses and benefits. At my age, I'd be earning more than my parents ever had, even in their best years combined. But when I called to share the news, their reaction was, as always, deflating. "More responsibility just means more stress," Mom said flatly. "And if it's a brand new hospital, how do you know it'll succeed? Seems like a big risk leaving a stable job." "I wouldn't be leaving," I explained patiently. "This is a promotion within the same system." "Still risky," she said. "Mark's career is much safer, more traditional." By then I knew better than to expect excitement from them, but it still amazed me how they could twist any milestone into something negative. On a later visit, Dad made a half-hearted concession. "The house is nice," he admitted, "though I don't know why two people need so much space. Mark and his fiancée are buying a condo in Manhattan. Much more practical." Hoping to show them a side of me they'd never really acknowledged, I gave them a tour of my hospital. I thought maybe seeing me in action would finally make them proud. Instead, they scrolled through their phones and made casual remarks about how stressful my job looked. "All those life and death choices," Mom said, wrinkling her nose. "I couldn't handle it. Good thing Mark chose a career without such pressure." Even when the hospital newsletter ran a feature on me for performing a particularly complex surgery, Dad brushed it off. "Anyone can get their picture in a company newsletter," he said. Mark was profiled in a national business magazine. Eventually, I stopped looking for their validation. David and I built a good life, surrounded by friends who valued us and colleagues who respected us. I found deep fulfillment in my work, saving lives, training younger surgeons, contributing to research, and growing in responsibility. By 34, I was a senior surgeon, a candidate for chief of surgery, with thousands of successful operations behind me, multiple publications, and invitations to speak at conferences nationwide. I was secure, respected, and financially comfortable. But to my parents, I was still the daydreaming teenager they thought would burn out. Which brings me to what happened last month. My grandmother, my father's mother, passed away at 91. Grandma Rose had always been my one steady supporter. Through medical school she mailed care packages, called to check in, and reminded me she was proud. Losing her broke my heart, but I was grateful she'd lived long enough to witness my success. The reading of her will was set for a Thursday morning at the offices of Patterson, Burke and Associates. I cleared my surgical schedule, a rarity for me, but there was no way I'd miss paying my respects to the woman who had carried my confidence when no one else did. The law office was exactly what you'd picture. Polished dark wood, shelves lined with leather-bound books, and the faint scent of old money mixed with older secrets. Mr. Patterson, a dignified man in his 60s who had managed our family's legal matters for decades, presided over the proceedings. Present at the will reading were my parents, my brother Mark and his wife Jessica, my Aunt Linda, Dad's sister, Uncle Tom, who was Mom's brother, and me. We all gathered around a long polished conference table, while Mr. Patterson went through the documents. What we learned surprised us all. Grandma Rose had been far wealthier than anyone realized. She'd quietly invested my grandfather's pension for decades, and her estate had grown into something substantial. Most of her assets and keepsakes were divided among the family, with each person receiving something thoughtful and meaningful. Then Mr. Patterson got to the final item. "To my granddaughter Emily," he read, "I leave my home at 412 Maple Street with all of its contents, and the sum of $750,000 from my investment portfolio. Emily has always followed her dreams despite the doubts of others, and I want her to know how proud I am of the doctor she's become." The room froze. $750,000, plus a house in one of the nicest neighborhoods. It was the largest single inheritance by far. I sat there stunned. I'd always known Grandma loved me, but I had no idea how successful her investments had been, or that she had chosen to leave me such a remarkable share of her estate. My parents, however, weren't stunned. They were livid. "This must be some kind of mistake," Mom blurted out. Emily doesn't need that kind of money. She barely gets by as it is. Mr. Patterson arched a brow. I assure you, Mrs. Dawson, these were Mrs. Rose's exact wishes. She revised this will just 6 months ago and was fully competent. Dad jumped in. It doesn't add up. Emily's career has never been stable. She's reckless with money, always chasing far-fetched goals. Mark has a real career, a secure future. Surely my mother intended the money to go to someone responsible. Mark looked uncomfortable as they spoke, but he didn't defend me. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. The will is explicit. If you wish to challenge it, that must be done through the courts. My parents exchanged a look I knew too well, the same one I'd seen when I told them I wanted to be a doctor, when I got into medical school, when I achieved milestones they insisted were impossible. We'll contest the will, Mom declared. My mother-in-law clearly wasn't thinking clearly. Emily's never been financially responsible. She's lived paycheck to paycheck her entire life, drowning in debt, making one impractical choice after another. Mark should inherit the majority. It felt like a slap across the face. After everything I'd proven, after all I'd achieved, they still labeled me a failure. Mr. Patterson looked uneasy but said, That is your right. But be warned, contesting a will is costly, and Mrs. Rose documented her reasoning very carefully. We don't care about the cost, Dad insisted. This is about doing what's best for the family. And that's how 3 weeks later, I ended up in a courtroom watching my own parents try to overturn my grandmother's last wishes. They had hired a sharp attorney named Ms. Rodriguez, who argued that Grandma Rose had either been unduly influenced or was slipping mentally when she wrote her final will. Their case revolved around painting me as financially reckless, claiming that leaving me such a large inheritance could only mean she wasn't of sound mind. On the witness stand, my parents dismantled my life piece by piece. Your Honor, Mom said, her voice heavy with that same patronizing edge I'd heard all my life. My daughter has always been a dreamer, completely unrealistic about her abilities and her future. She buried herself in massive student loans for an impractical career, and she's never shown she can manage money responsibly. Could you clarify what you mean by impractical career path? Ms. Rodriguez pressed. She insisted on medical school, even though she didn't have the grades or the aptitude for it, Mom answered sharply. We tried to steer her toward more realistic choices, but she ignored us. She's been drowning financially ever since, always borrowing money, never able to stand on her own 2 feet. I sat there in silence, listening to the smear campaign unfold, while my attorney scribbled notes beside me with a look of disbelief. We had anticipated plenty of arguments, but I hadn't expected my parents to flat out invent a false picture of my life. Dad took the stand next, and his words cut even deeper. Emily has never been able to support herself, he declared. My daughter can't manage her own bills. She's always been a useless dreamer, living beyond her means, making foolish choices, with no grasp of financial responsibility. My mother was clearly not in her right mind when she left that kind of money to someone destined to squander it. Useless dreamer. Hearing that from my own father after everything I had accomplished, it felt like a punch to the gut. Then Mark testified. He wasn't as vicious, but his words still stung. Emily's always had her struggles, he said carefully. I think Grandma might have believed she needed the help more than she truly did. I'm not sure she fully understood Emily's situation. Through all of this, I realized something important. Not one of them had asked me about my current job, my current financial standing, or my life today. They were clinging to outdated assumptions, painting me as the same naive teenager they thought would never amount to anything. Then it was my turn. My lawyer, Mr. Thompson, stood with a slight smile. Your Honor, I'd like to call Dr. Emily Williams to the stand. Even the word doctor seemed to jolt my family. I walked up, hands trembling slightly, and was sworn in. This wasn't an operating room where I had control and confidence. This was a battlefield where my own family was trying to brand me a failure, and it hurt far more than I'd anticipated. Mr. Thompson began gently, asking about my background and education. I spoke about medical school, residency, and the fellowship that shaped me into the surgeon I am today. As I spoke, I watched the certainty fade from my family's faces, shifting into confusion, then unease. Dr. Williams, Mr. Thompson said, Can you tell the court about your current role? I'm a senior surgeon at Metropolitan General, I replied clearly. My specialties are general and trauma surgery. I've been practicing nearly 10 years. I caught Mom's face turning pale, and Dad looked as if someone had gut-punched him. And what exactly does your work involve? Thompson asked. I perform complex surgeries, supervise medical students and residents, publish research, and sit on several hospital committees. Right now, I'm being considered for promotion to Chief of Surgery at our new satellite hospital. Could you walk us through a typical schedule? I work 60 to 70 hours a week, often on call for emergency cases. I also lecture at the university's medical school and contribute regularly to peer-reviewed journals. My parents were staring at me as if they were only just now beginning to understand who I'd become. Finally, Thompson turned to the heart of the issue. Dr. Williams, your parents testified that you're financially irresponsible and unable to pay your bills. How do you respond to that? I steadied my breath. Your Honor, I believe my parents' information is badly outdated. As a senior surgeon, I earn $387,000 annually. My husband David is also a surgeon with a similar income. We own our home outright, aside from our mortgage, and we maintain significant savings and investment accounts. We are financially stable. The courtroom was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. We also maintain a joint investment portfolio worth about $1.2 million, I continued steadily. I haven't borrowed money from anyone in over 8 years, and I haven't had financial difficulties since completing residency. Across the aisle, Ms. Rodriguez looked rattled. It was obvious she'd done little homework before taking on this case. Any attorney with even a shred of diligence would have run basic checks. Allowing my parents to spin lies about my finances without verifying the reality of my career wasn't just sloppy. It bordered on willful ignorance. Judge Harrison, who had been listening intently, leaned forward. He was an older man with kind eyes, and throughout the hearing he'd been jotting down careful notes. Let me make sure I've got this right, he said slowly, fixing his gaze on my parents. You're suggesting that your mother was not of sound mind when she left a substantial inheritance to her granddaughter, who is, in fact, a senior surgeon earning close to $400,000 a year? Mom opened her mouth but nothing came out. The judge pressed on, his tone edging toward disbelief. Your testimony is that Dr. Williams is financially irresponsible, unable to pay her bills, yet she's been a practicing surgeon for nearly a decade? The silence that followed was crushing. My parents sat pale and stunned. Judge Harrison shuffled his notes, looked at me, then back at them. Mr. and Mrs. Dawson, when was the last time you actually asked your daughter about her career or her financial situation? My parents exchanged a helpless glance. Oui, Mom stammered. Dad finally admitted. It's been several years, Your Honor. The judge nodded slowly. So your testimony wasn't based on facts but on assumptions? We thought, Mom began. You thought, Judge Harrison repeated, his voice dry. You thought that a senior surgeon at a major metropolitan hospital, a doctor with nearly a decade of practice, was financially irresponsible and unable to manage her own bills? Laid out like that, the absurdity was undeniable. My lawyer, Mr. Thompson, rose. Your Honor, I'd like to submit additional documentation. He handed over a stack: bank statements, tax returns, my employment contract, hospital performance reviews, letters from respected colleagues. Together, they painted an irrefutable picture. A stable, successful surgeon with strong finances and an impeccable reputation. The judge flipped through the materials in silence while the weight in the room grew heavier. My parents shrank in their seats, as if hoping to disappear. At last, Judge Harrison set the papers aside and looked up. Based on the evidence, I see no grounds to contest this will. Mrs. Rose was entirely competent and deliberate in her decisions. Leaving a significant inheritance to her accomplished, financially stable granddaughter is perfectly logical. The will stands as written. He paused, then looked directly at my parents. I strongly suggest this family start having honest conversations about present reality, rather than clinging to outdated assumptions. The gavel came down, sharp and final. It was over. As we stepped out of the courtroom, my parents approached hesitantly. Emily, Mom said softly, we didn't know. We thought. You thought I was still the struggling student from 15 years ago. I cut in. But you never asked. You never wanted to see me for who I became. You were too invested in proving I'd failed to notice that I'd already succeeded. Dad's face flushed with shame. We should have known. Yes, I said evenly. But knowing would have meant caring enough to ask. Mark came over then, looking uncomfortable. Emily, I'm sorry. I should have spoken up. I should have defended you, Mark admitted quietly. Yes, you should have, I answered plain and simple. I walked out of that courtroom with Grandma Rose's inheritance intact. But what stayed with me far more than the money was the sense of vindication I'd never thought I'd get. My parents had spent decades convinced I would fall flat, so locked into their version of me that they never even noticed I'd surpassed every expectation they'd had. And then some. The money was generous, of course, but it wasn't life-changing for someone with my salary. What mattered was that Grandma had seen me for who I truly was, not the failure my parents insisted I would always be. In the weeks afterward, my parents tried, awkwardly, to mend fences. They called more often, asked halting questions about my work, even came by the hospital to watch me in my element. It was clear they were shaken, especially Mom. During one phone call she said, I don't understand how we got it so wrong. How did we not realize how successful you were? Because you never asked, I told her. For years, every conversation was about Mark's promotions or your assumptions about my shortcomings. Not once did you ask about my position, my pay, or my achievements. We thought we knew, she whispered. You thought you knew, I corrected. Because that version of me, the struggling dreamer who would never measure up, fit the story you wanted to believe. My relationship with them is still strained, and I doubt it will ever fully heal. Years of being dismissed and belittled don't vanish with a few apologies. But there is something powerful about the moment when lifelong doubters are forced to stare down the truth of your success. David and I have decided to use part of Grandma Rose's gift to start a scholarship for kids from working-class families who dream of becoming doctors. We're calling it the Rose Dawson Memorial Scholarship for Dreamers. Because dreamers often see possibilities others can't even fathom. And sometimes the ones who doubt you most turn out to be the ones most spectacularly wrong. As for my parents, they're slowly adjusting to seeing me as I am, not as they always assumed I'd be. It's an ongoing process, awkward and uncomfortable but real. Still, I'll never forget the moment Judge Harrison leaned over and said to my mother, she's been a senior surgeon for almost a decade. That was the day 15 years of doubt, condescension, and diminished expectations finally collapsed under the weight of reality. Sometimes the best revenge isn't something you plan. It's living your life so fully and so well that the people who dismissed you have no choice but to confront their own blindness. And sometimes justice comes not with fanfare, but in the steady voice of a judge who cannot fathom why anyone would label a successful surgeon financially irresponsible. The irony isn't lost on me that my parents tried to prove in court that I was a failure, and instead orchestrated the most public proof of my success imaginable. Thanks for listening. Sometimes you just need to tell your story to people who might actually understand. And yes, I know it might sound unbelievable, but I promise it unfolded exactly this way. That moment in court was surreal for all of us, especially for my parents. I've changed names and certain details for privacy, but the heart of it is true. Real life can be stranger than fiction.